Welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast. Each week you'll find inspirational, motivational interviews with some of the world's best language learners, industry experts, all trying to help you to learn foreign languages better, faster, and more efficiently. And here we go. If you're looking for a language teacher to enhance your language learning, then I highly recommend Italki. Italki is the world's biggest tutoring platform, and you can find thousands of teachers and tutors at very reasonable prices. Get a free lesson after completing your first lesson by going to languageteacher.co. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 160 of the Actual Fluency Podcast. And today I'm bringing back Steve Kaufman on the podcast, who was last on in 2014 on episode 5. So it's been 5 years since I last talked to Steve on the podcast. Since then I've met him a few times in Canada. I met him at the LangFest, and we're going to meet again in August, where we're going to be going to Montreal and have a good time there. And I also met him in Bratislava in 2017 for the Plugger Gathering. So even though he hasn't been on the show, I've still had the opportunity to talk to him. And in case you don't know who Steve Kaufman is, who are you? Is this your first language learning podcast? If it is, welcome. That's really exciting as well. But I think most people know Steve for he's done so much work in the industry. He's got one of the most popular YouTube channels about learning languages. He's the founder of LingQ, a software that helps you learn language. Amazing talent as well. Steve speaks a lot of languages, and he keeps learning new ones. And as we get into, it's not really about how many languages you know, and it's not really, if somebody says, I know 15 languages, it doesn't mean that they can just whip out 15 languages and have a really high-level conversation. There's always going to be different times when the language is stronger and weaker. But as Steve points out, it's all about having fun. And it is kind of a catch-up episode, and we get around quite a few topics related to language learning. And Steve also shares a few strategies on how you can use software LingQ to really elevate your language learning. So go give it a try, and otherwise enjoy the episode, and I'll see you in the next one. Well, Steve, you're one of the most known faces in the Plugger community and through your work on YouTube. It's such a pleasure to bring you back again for another episode. As I just said before we started recording, it's been over 5 years since our last episode together, which was in April of 2014. So it's been a while. So I'm looking forward to catching up. But first of all, for the few people who might not have heard of you, do you just want to give a quick bio of who you are, where you're from, and what you've been up to?
Okay, well, I live in Vancouver, and for most of my career, I was in the lumber business. The lumber business took me, and prior to that, briefly, I was a diplomat for 7 years in the lumber business. And with that, I lived in Hong Kong and learned Chinese, and lived in Japan and learned Japanese. And then got interested in languages. Of course, I studied in France, so I had French. And then I just discovered I enjoyed learning languages, and have always, wherever I had the opportunity, I've learned languages. And of course, I did business in Europe, Germany, Spain, Sweden. And so I learned a bunch of languages. And then 12, 13 years ago, when I was more or less retired or semi-retired, started a website called LingQ with my son. And that's a whole long story. We won't get into that. But that has really gotten me into language learning in the last 12, 13 years to an extent that I never was before. Because once I have that tool, then I want to use it. So I've learned, in fact, 11 languages in the last 12, 13 years, working on Turkish right now.
Fantastic.
Not that I speak them all fluently, by no means, but I enjoy exploring languages. Yeah, and of course, I have a YouTube channel, and I have a blog, and of course LingQ, and so it's become like a second career, not a remunerative career. Well, I shouldn't say that, but anyway, it's a passion.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to tell the story of the first episode. I can't remember if I told it. I told it in Montreal for sure. I don't know if you were in the audience at that time, but anyway, I'll tell it just for the listeners to give them a reminder, because I think it's fun to go back. And the podcast was basically started because I knew I couldn't finish anything. So I was like, I wanted accountability, but how do you start an interview podcast if nobody knows who you are? You've never had anyone on who's, as a name in anything. So how do you get that first yes? And I sent out a massive invites, and some people were a little bit, maybe, maybe not. And I remember sending an email to you, and you said, yeah, let's do it. And then the week after, I said, okay, what time would be a good time to do this? And I expected, well, let's do Thursday 2 weeks. I'd had time to prepare. I was speaking to one of the industry greats. Your YouTube channel was already pretty popular at that time, and you just replied back saying, "What about now?" Like sent from my iPad. And I was like, I can't let this opportunity pass. But at the same time, I haven't prepared. It's midnight. What do I panic? But I just said, okay, yes, let's do it, because I didn't know if the opportunity was going to come that readily again. So we had the conversation, and it was fantastic. And because you had been on so early, I was able to get a lot of other people on who knew of you. So I really need to thank you, because you were one of the main reasons that the podcast started so well and had so many people who wanted to be on it, because they'd seen that you had been on it. So that's the origin story for everyone out there.
The reason I say how about now is because if we book some date into the future, I don't know if I'm going to have a dentist appointment or I'm going to be doing something else. If I know I have time right now, I'm always like, if anything can be done now, I prefer to do it now.
Agreed, totally.
That are hanging out there, the better.
But I had never interviewed anyone. That was before the first interview, and it was in a foreign language, sort of bilingual anyway. So that wasn't a big deal. But just starting out, just so nervous because I'd never done it before, and it was like I said, your YouTube channel was so popular. Everybody knew you because of the back and forth with Benny at that time, and so it was just a really big deal for me. And the fact that you just said now is like made it. It was very cool, and it's great that we did it right there, but it was also very nerve-wracking for me. But I think we got through it. If people want to hear how I sounded in the beginning of the podcast compared to now, you can go back and listen to episode 5 with Steve, where we also talk a little bit more about your history, I believe, and we talk a little bit more about the background of Link. So those topics are kind of covered. But you said 11 languages in 10, 13 years. That's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I think polyglots have a problem. So you're asked, how many languages can you speak or do you know? Okay, there are some languages that I speak very well. There's some that, I spent 4 months on Persian and ended up with an exit interview, which I call an exit interview after the study. And I can say certain things in Persian. I can go around to shopkeepers here in North Vancouver, and they get, by the way, the Iranians, I have never seen a group of people that are so happy when you speak to them in their language.
Right.
But I can't really say that I speak it well. So obviously should I not mention languages that I don't speak that well? Should I not, I learned up my Greek and I went to Crete and I was using it happily. The same with Romanian. If someone came to me now and started speaking to me in Greek or Romanian, I would be incapable of saying much. And yet I know that if I had just a few days to go over some of the material that I had used, that I'd be right back to where I was, and probably I would quickly improve. So I kind of look at it as, you got, for example, Moses McCormick, right? And so some people like to criticize Moses because he's not perfect in all 55 or however many languages he's meant to speak. But that's fine. Like, it's fun exploring languages. Whatever you put into the language, it's there. It doesn't go away.
Yeah.
And, like my Korean, I've gone back to it several times, and each time I raise it a notch or two, but I'm not tremendous in Korean. It all counts, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, I've noticed when I've watched some of your videos, and I noticed that you often come back and do another, let's say 3 months or another stint in the languages that you already know to kind of improve them. So it's kind of I guess a steady increase in level that you always have a base that keeps going up. So your bottom is always better than it was last time you did a challenge. Or
just like, it's like you've got another bank account, and you can let the money sit there for a while, and then you can go and put some more money in the bank account. That's all. So it's not, so I think most so-called polyglots would probably claim really good fluency, like your podcast is actual fluency, in maybe half a dozen or so, and maybe Richard Simcott or Luca might go for more. but it starts to go downhill pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's a funny question to ask polyglots that speak a lot of languages, because there's always a disclaimer or some kind of, well, if you ask how many languages they speak, there's always like a full sentence of explanation. And I get it as well. And it's like, what do you actually answer? Because speaking, it doesn't really mean anything. If you say one word, are you speaking the language? Do you need to be absolutely perfect?
Well,
So
exactly.
everyone has that issue, even from kind of if you only knew a couple languages like myself. But I think you're right in that most of the really top class polyglots, some of my friends that I know from the community, they wouldn't claim to be very good at more than like half a dozen languages. I think that number sounds pretty good. And
Mhm.
then they probably have, they can have 50 more in sort of various levels, but it's always going to be a core group of languages that you have, that everyone has, really.
I mean, it's so much fun. Like I'm now sort of focusing my attention on sort of Middle East, Central Asia, Middle East. So it's a lot of fun to explore Turkish, Arabic, and Persian. They're in three different language families, but they share a significant amount of vocabulary.
Mm.
And of course, historically, culturally, they're connected. So that it's exciting to explore this. It's exciting to be able to read in those languages, to listen to podcasts that we kind of don't understand, but kind of are able to get snippets of. It's a great, my wife and I were watching this Turkish soap opera on Netflix, and I can't understand hardly anything except I pick out a word here and a word there. It's fun.
Yeah,
It's
and that's the most important thing, isn't it? You got to
yeah,
have fun,
fascinating
otherwise.
Turkish, That's not,
Yeah. So how do you pick your next project? Is it sudden? It,
circumstance. You know, uh, right now, for example, my wife and I are going to Croatia. It's going to be our 50th wedding anniversary, so we figured we'd
oh,
have a nice time.
congratulations.
He was originally going to come to Fukuoka, but then we lived there for 9 years, so that's not. We're going to go
Oh,
to Croatia. So we're now getting Serbo-Croat mini stories on Link, and we're going to launch Serbo-Croat. So probably I'll have to kind of stop my Turkish and spend a couple of weeks on Serbo-Croat before I go there, because I think with my other Slavic languages, that's all I'll need in order
right.
to at least have a sense of what people are saying and stuff. So it's just circumstance. I had to go to Romania, so I learned Romanian. We were going to go to Crete, so I learned, Greek. Um, but the Arabic, I was in Israel, and I initially tried to learn Hebrew, and I didn't put enough time into it, of course. But then we went into Jordan, and I said, hey, there's like 350 million Arabic speakers versus 10 million Hebrew speakers. I think I'll move over to Arabic. So
Right.
I got Arabic. So then I said, I've learned the writing system. There's a lot of Farsi speakers here in Vancouver. Why don't I, take advantage of the fact that I've learned the writing system then to learn Persian? So then I went into Persian. And then my wife started watching these Turkish soap operas on television. So I said, geez, I should try to learn some Turkish. So it could be anything. It doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. Just follow whatever the circumstances are. If you like traveling, or even if you like something on TV, I think.
And very often one language leads to another. So having learned Russian, I decided to go after Czech and Polish and then Ukrainian. So, learned up a bit of Slovak before going to Bratislava a couple of years ago.
Do
Although
you
Slovak and Czech are so close, it's hardly
do you
another language.
always try to go traveling to the country of the language you're learning, or are you learning the countries where you're going to go travel, or both?
I don't like to arrive in a country without knowing some of the language. And I think even in terms of using sort of travel as a means of learning a language, I always recommend that make sure you put a lot of effort into the language before you go,
Hmm.
because that way you can take advantage. Otherwise, if you arrive with zero knowledge, you won't be able to do anything. And I've had that experience. I've arrived in Vietnam or Myanmar knowing relatively little, and I had a phrase book, and at the end of a week, I still had only one phrase.
Hmm.
It's not that easy. It's
Yeah, I
not.
moved to Hungary, and I didn't know I was moving to Hungary. I was supposed to just be there for a week for a holiday, but then I decided to stay instead of moving to Berlin, where I was originally going to move. And I found myself in a country where I didn't understand anything, and I thought, okay, I'll just learn it. But actually, immersion, I think, is great if you have a base, because then you can connect it to something. if you have absolutely nothing, I think sometimes it's even working against you, because it's just a complete nightmare. I mean, you don't know anything. You don't have anything to start from. So I found it extremely difficult to get started on a language in the country. And I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. So definitely get some language study in before, a few months before at least, just to have it that base, because otherwise it's
And
impossible.
even if you have some of the language, you always have to arrange some speaking partners before you get there. If you arrive there and you hope that you're going to walk into a store or into a cafe or sit in a bar and start a conversation, forget it.
Yeah.
So, for example, after spending a fair amount of time on Czech, then I had 2 online tutors, and I arranged that I would spend, a couple of hours with each of them every day. So I had guaranteed 5 or 6 hours of speaking every day in Prague. The same with Ukrainian. I went to Lviv. I had my teacher there, and we had actually 6 hours a day. I hardly recommend that. We would meet for coffee at 8, and we speak for 3 hours. Or we would tour the city, and everything's in Ukrainian. And then she writes out all of my mistakes and phrases onto her little iPhone, and she sends it to me. And then at noon, I go home to my apartment and I study it in LINGQ. I import it as a lesson. And then I meet her again at 2, and then we tour something else in the city. And I did that for 5 days. But you have to organize it.
Yeah.
Or if you're in a low-wage country, the most sort of economical language teachers are the taxi drivers. So you can just jump in a Uber or something and talk for,
Yeah, just go in a circle.
just go around in circles.
Yeah.
Taxi
Sounds like,
drivers can talk, so there's never a problem in getting them to talk.
yeah, sometimes. I think the most talkative people are probably hairdressers, but
Okay.
that sounds dangerous also, if you don't know how to say what you'd like to have done.
Exactly.
You get in. Sometimes the hard part is to getting them to stop talking, I find in the hair
Start
shop.
talking and stop talking.
Yeah, there's too much. No, that's really cool. And also something you probably get asked a lot is, when you look at all these like polygons and the websites and YouTube channels, it's all 25-year-old males, single, traveling all the time, and people say, "Oh, it's easy for you. You don't have a family. You don't have to be anywhere. You don't have. It doesn't cost much to travel that way, and oh, you can just learn all the languages you want." And you're clearly not in that category. So I'm sure you get questions about how can you put so much effort into languages and the traveling, because you travel a lot as well, I've noticed. So how do you plan out your travel? Is it based on holidays, or do you just, whenever you see something interesting, you book the trip, or is there a system to it? We'll just take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, italki, but we'll be right back. On this podcast, I've interviewed hundreds of language learners, some of the world's greatest polyglots and industry experts. And one thing they all agree on is the value of one-to-one tutoring lessons. And for this, I highly recommend italki. They have thousands of teachers in all price ranges, and they even have certified teachers who have taken diplomas or have degrees in the language you're learning. So whether you're just brushing up on your Italian ahead of a trip to Rome, or you want to master Russian to take the exam, or whatever your goals are in languages, italki has a tutor suitable for you. And compared to private tutoring offline, it's really affordable. You can find informal tutors down to $5 an hour, and you can have trial lessons for even less. So if you want to master a language from the comfort of your own home, and you even get a $10 credit when you complete your first lesson, go to languageteacher.co and check out italki. It might be the best thing you do for your language learning this year.
Well, I mean, obviously I'm retired, so I don't have any obligations work-wise. I don't know. I'd like to go and see different countries. Either we go with friends or my wife and I go. My last trip in Ukraine, I wanted to follow up because I'd been communicating with these people in the war zone, helping them a little bit, and I wanted to see what they were doing. And then I decided I'd have a stop by Lviv again and refresh my Ukrainian. We're going to Japan now, Croatia I have no plans, but it seems for one reason or another. And my wife likes to play golf, so we're going to Croatia, and then we're going to Spain. We're going to Girona near Barcelona, where she found some golf clinic. So okay, so we're going to do that. But so there's three issues in your question, really. One is planning my travel. I don't plan. I just go. B, there is an issue. If you're a young 25-year-old traveling all the time, you can spend as much time as you want. And if you say, okay, now I'm going to learn language X, I can go find a girlfriend in language X, I can travel to the country, there's no limit. Once you're, a grandpa with family, with wife and grandchildren and the social network of people and other activities, and the wife likes to play golf and all the rest of it, you have 2 hours a day to devote to language. And by making sure that I listen to language while I'm doing the dishes, while I'm cleaning up the garage, while I'm exercising, while I'm in the car, so that takes care of at least an hour of it. So then I have to find another hour to sit down and read and try to learn. So that's I can't just go off and do whatever I want. People say, well, I say, I have no one to speak to in, say, Russian or, whatever, Greek here in Vancouver. Oh, no, there's lots of Greeks in Vancouver. Yeah, but I'm not going to spend my day chasing down Greeks somewhere in Vancouver just to have, I have other things happening in my life. So it's different. If you're 25 and you're totally committed to Greek, and you take off and you spend 6 months on a Greek island and have a Greek girlfriend and all that kind of stuff. But no, I can't do that.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I'm sure some people are listening. They say, oh, he's retired, he can spend 10 hours a day. But actually, with all the commitments in your family, that hour a day becomes key, and consistency, I guess, is more important than the amount of hours anyway.
I find that the listening is very important, because I listen, and that's so easy to do. I get up, I put on my earphone, I prepare breakfast. I listen, I don't understand. So now I'm motivated to read, because I didn't understand what I was listening to. So the listening, is very important. People don't listen enough. No. If I look at people's statistics on LinkedIn, sometimes people ask me to analyze their profile. People don't listen enough. Like, I've been into Turkish now for 13 days. I looked at my statistics. I've listened to 18 hours. Turkish.
That's a lot, okay? Yeah.
There's people in 6 months who don't listen to 18 hours of the language they're trying to learn. So listening is key, and that triggers the rest of it.
Yeah, and I think we're in this gamification age now where you almost have to do something active, whether it's with your fingers or your brain, where you have to click some buttons or do a game, or otherwise you feel like you're not doing anything. But actually that kind of input of I mean, people are not reading enough anyway either, so it's a question of what are people actually doing. But yeah, definitely listening. Also for the pronunciation, how are you gonna be able to say the words correctly if you haven't heard them, let's say, over and over again?
The listening gives you some momentum, because when you're reading in a foreign language, inevitably you're sub-vocalizing, right? If you read in your own language, typically you just fly over it, its meaning. You don't necessarily pronounce it to yourself in your head. But when you're reading in a foreign language, I find that I tend to sub-vocalize. That's why the listening is so important, because I've heard it so often now, because I'll typically listen to the same stuff many, many times. So then I have this momentum going into my reading. So even though if I were to say it out loud, I would say it wrong, but at least in my mind, I'm saying it correctly.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point.
And then, and it's interesting. I'm going to do a video, in fact, tomorrow, and I'm going to show the difference, because it's very important to be active in the language. Like at LINGQ, we measure activity. We don't measure the outcome, because as long as you're active, you'll improve. So we measure the reading, the listening, and all the stuff. And there's different ways of being active. There's sometimes, I don't want to read this thing for the 10th time. So then maybe I want to do my flashcards, but then I can do the flashcards. I can do dictation, for example. I can go through a story in sentence by sentence and hear the natural voice. You've now set it up timestamp, so you can hear the natural voice for that sentence. I can try to imitate the intonation of that person and say it out loud. So these are things where I'm not increasing my vocabulary, but I'm getting deeper into the language, a better sense of the pronunciation. If I do the dictation, I get a better sense of how it's written. Because, for example, in Turkish, so I've read so many words where the letter C is pronounced J. Okay, but when you get dictation for the first time, and you get a word that has j, project or whatever. Also, now don't remember that C is j. So I write a J, and then it comes back J, C. And so you think you know certain things, but by going in more deeply in these activities, you discover, in fact, where some of the missing, where the gaps are. And then I go back to more reading and listening. So I think the key thing is to be active.
Yeah. Consistency, yeah. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people also struggle a little bit to fit in the language learning if they have, kids and family and
Right.
careers and everything. So the idea of filling up your chores with listening, I think, is a fantastic idea, because we all have a smartphone these days where you can play podcasts or any kind of audio. So if you are doing the dishes anywhere, or if you're on the train or commute in the car even, that just get that kind of listening done there, where you have some extra time. You're actually adding hours to the day, I suppose. You don't need to set aside a dedicated hour. I mean, ideally, of course, but some people they can't do that. So fill up the dead space in a way. And doing the dishes is so much more fun if you have something to listen to anyway, right?
Absolutely.
So I was wondering, so it's been 5 years since we last talked on the podcast anyway. We met in Bratislava a few years ago. But I was wondering, is there anything that you've changed in your kind of approach to language learning in those 5 years? Like any kind of methods or any things you used to believe was really good that maybe now isn't so good, or vice versa?
I think the biggest thing that has changed is the impact of our mini stories, which is not something that we invented. I got it from Piotr of realpolish.pl. If you ever learn Polish, you got to go to his website. And he says he got it from AJ Hogue, who has this
Learn English.
Effortless English, who in turn got it from some other group of people. And it's these point of view stories, right? They're the same story repeats, like I did something, or you will do something. So the tense and the person changes. And then there's a bunch of questions. So the same words and phrases repeat 3, 4, 5, 6 times within the same story. What that has done for me, it has, first of all, significantly sped up my learning. So for Greek, for Persian, for Arabic. I mean, I was speaking with my Persian tutor after 2 months, whereas it took me 8 months to speak to my Czech tutor, even though with Czech, I had done Russian. So I had a lot of, the grammar is essentially the same. Vocabulary is 60% the same. So, and with that, I start speaking earlier. And with that now, I appreciate the role of the tutor more, because what the tutor does with me is that usually it's a she, will create a sort of a file, a document with all of my, not all, but enough of my words and phrases that I had trouble with. So I get this from her and she records it. So I have these 3, 4, 5, 6 minute recordings. And I have in each of my languages, going back to when I first started, I have 5, 6 minutes of each of our conversations, not the whole conversation, but things that I had difficulty with. So I go back to them and I review them 6 months ago, 8 months ago. I find that is a tremendous assist. So it's still input based, but I'm getting to output earlier, because the mini stories give me phrases that I can use earlier. My comprehension, which is key to I can't connect with a tutor if I don't understand what the tutor is saying. So you have to get to some level of comprehension, have some vocabulary before you can speak. And the mini stories, albeit on a more limited range of vocabulary, get me there earlier. And then I actually appreciate once or twice a week having that interaction with the tutor. Whereas if we go back to, I think I did Czech back in, I can't remember when it was, might have been 5, 6 years ago. As I say, it took me 7 or 8 months before I felt that I could engage with a tutor, where I felt that I would understand what they were saying, that I would have some things to say beyond, hello, my name is. So that's I think the big thing that's changed.
Right. And do you facilitate that via link, or do you have to do you find your own tutor per language?
With regard to the tutors, if I can find a tutor on Link, that's what I prefer to do, because A, it supports our site, and B, the format is there. They know what they have to do. They can record and add the recording, and I get the thing back as a lesson. Right. But in languages where we don't have tutors, Then I go to italki and I ask them, and I find someone who's willing to do what I want them to do, which isn't difficult. Increasingly, all the tutors know that they've got to provide you with a list of your words and phrases.
Yeah, or at least that it's not just speaking to you. That there's something else usually expected. I think
I'm finding now, even in Persian, in Arabic, I say I would like you to give me a list of my mistakes. Okay, I'll give you a Google document. Bingo, the Google document pops up. They're pretty swift now, I think, the tutors.
Yeah, I think the competition is definitely because there's so many tutors on italki. You can't
Right.
afford to be like a bad tutor because then you just
Right.
get bad ratings and then you never get any new students. So that's nice to see that the quality has definitely gone up and
Oh yeah.
people are using these methods.
Mhm.
So one controversial thing that I've seen in the last few years is the silent period.
Oh yeah.
So just to maybe talk about that a little bit, you said that before you start speaking with a tutor, and this is something I agree on as well. I think it's a bit silly to have a tutoring lesson. The first lesson you do the language, you should have some kind of base so you actually have something to use with the tutor.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you don't speak for, I forget what the original theory was. Was it like 3 months or something? But what do you think of the silent period? And do you do any of that in your learning? Like how long is that period before you start
Well,
speaking?
first of all, my position has always been that you should speak when you want to speak.
Right.
So
Speak from day
there should
one.
be no obligation to speak. And in fact, I think often in traditional language class, they put too much pressure on people to speak, and
Mm.
even correctly, when they have very little chance of doing that, and puts pressure on them. And either they can't speak as well as the other kids in the class, or they don't like listening to the other kids in the class. So to me, it's unnecessary. And then, but there was, and I was recently corrected. I had heard that there's a school in Thailand that says you must not speak for the first 6 months. In other words, they're forbidden to speak. That's what I
Wow.
read. So I commented somewhere that I didn't think that was very smart. If I live in Thailand, if I know how to point at a banana and say banana, I'm going to do that. So they came back and said, no, that's not what they're saying. And that they're actually saying speak when you want to speak. But
Okay.
they encourage people to wait until they have enough of the language. I don't think you can ingrain bad habits. I don't think that's an issue. I think the only issue is when do you feel comfortable speaking? And when you and they're like, I am very self-motivated, so I don't need a tutor. I don't need a tutor to teach me the language. I can Google for Turkish verbs. I'll find all the information I need. I don't need the Turkish tutor to explain Turkish verbs to me.
Right.
Not everyone is equally motivated. Some people probably will the only thing they do is talk to the tutor because they are not motivated to do anything on their own. So, and in between, there's a whole range of people who some require the tutor to prod them, to encourage them. Other people don't. For me, the tutor is someone I talk to,
Mm.
someone who will create a record of some of the things I had trouble saying and send me that as a file and as an audio file. That's all I require.
Yeah.
And of course, that personal interaction is motivating because you do want to show your tutor that over time you improve. So you're putting all that effort into, she sends me all these mistakes. Of course, I get them the same mistakes wrong the second time. I see the same mistake I report week after week after week. So it's not as if this is going to correct me, but it's an opportunity to interact with a person, to review that interaction. And so it's input. It's also output. I'm trying
Yeah.
to use what I've learned. But as for when that should begin, I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters whether you start after 1 month, 3 months, or 6 months. But I have found now and I think Link is better than it was 5 years ago. And with the mini stories, I am starting earlier. Like with Turkish, I've been at it for less than 2 weeks. I think in another 2 weeks, I want to start looking for a tutor.
Mm.
So that's very early compared to where I was previously.
Right. So you sped up even.
Yeah,
That's really impressive.
absolutely sped up.
And
Absolutely. I learned Persian. After 3 months in Persian, I was far ahead of where I was in Czech,
right.
even though Czech is written in a Latin alphabet and shares so much vocabulary. And almost all the grammar was Russian, which I had already done.
Right. And obviously you have a big YouTube channel, lots of videos, and lots of people watch the videos. So you must get tons of questions. What are some of your favorite questions? Maybe some of the maybe you have some questions that you are not a big fan of, maybe a pet peeve there somewhere, or some common issues that people have.
Well, of course, there are people who follow my YouTube channel because they find it motivating. And they generally appreciate, because I try to convey this idea that you can do it, and it doesn't matter, don't compare yourself to others, enjoy the language. If you enjoy the language, you will improve. The brain learns. So put in the time, enjoy it, and you'll improve. So there are those, and generally those comments are very appreciative. There are also people who are on LINQ. So questions come up that relate to LINQ. And the biggest problem people have with LINQ, in my opinion, is those that understand. Like, first of all, you have those that don't understand it and they go away. We're working on making it easier to understand. But those people who want to nail down the lesson, like they'll stay on that one lesson until they have like 100% mastered it. And so I have to explain, don't do that. Don't put pressure on yourself to understand it. Don't put pressure on yourself to remember anything. It doesn't matter. Just keep going. When you feel like it, move on. You understand half, move on. I think that's the biggest problem. People are reluctant to claim that they know a word. Just say you know it. You think you know it in this context? No. Next time you see it in a different context, you don't know it, you link it again. Unknown. Big deal. Yeah. People are too uptight, too sort of perfectionist in their approach. Whereas to me, it's like I don't know, it's like swimming. You just keep going, it doesn't matter. Eventually, if enough of it washes over you, you'll somehow pick it up. You won't know why you picked it up, but you did. So I think that kind of question, people who are too uptight, that's a very common question. And then you got the sort of snarly, the stupid old windbag, you're boring. Like, why would you go on someone's YouTube channel? No way. Like, most people who find me boring don't come back, That's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Don't watch it. Don't watch it. Yeah, I find it, well, obviously YouTube comments are notorious for kind of the trolls and the haters. So maybe it's just part of the platform. I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
Part of the platform. But I think the one thing that hasn't changed much is the kind of the way to learn languages, the advice that's been going out, if you were talking about this last 5 years. And I haven't seen, I like to follow a lot of the software, a lot of the books and methods. I haven't seen any revolution in terms of that we're suddenly being able to, like the Matrix where they just get a plug-in and they just French downloaded, there hasn't been that. So I think the fundamentals still apply, that we already touched on consistency and getting a lot of input, doing the output so you get to practice it. But at the end of the day, it can probably be summarized as you just have to do the work, whether that's, 8 hours a day like Benny did for some of his projects, or it's 1 hour a day where you can fit it in. Consistency is really key, and you will get where you want to be eventually.
I mean, one very interesting book that I read in German is written by this German neuroscientist called Manfred Spitzer. It's called Lernen. I can't remember what it was, but it talks about the brain. And one of the statements in there was, the brain learns. The brain cannot do other than learn, because the brain is constantly reacting to experience, right? And creating networks, neural connections to deal with that experience. Otherwise, we couldn't operate, we couldn't function, right? The brain is constantly, getting you to a point where you can almost anticipate what's going to happen because we've seen it before. That's what the brain does. The brain learns. But then he adds, but the brain learns slowly.
Right.
Definitely. Very important.
Yeah, because I'm sure there are people listening and they watch the videos, or they watch other polyglots who have had many, many years of experience learning languages, and they get really fine, say 3 months like you did with Persian, and they think, oh, it's just a talent thing and I could never do that. But, that's years and years of experience, right? So you can't compare yourself too harshly to other people. I think that's a big one as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Katolam, the Hungarian polyglot, who had this formula where she said attitude and time, divided by and she put inhibition. But I would broaden that to be any kind of resistance or constraint. So it's part of attitude. But if you don't think you can do it, if you don't like the language, if you're not confident that the way you're learning is right, like if whatever resistance there is going to require more time or a more positive attitude. But if there's little resistance, if you're learning Persian, I'm going to be Persian. You know what I mean? I like the language. I know that I'll get there if I just keep doing, and I don't get frustrated because I can't remember stuff. So I think the experienced polyglots, there's just less resistance. They're just confident that as long as I keep doing what I'm doing, wherever I get to, I'll get to. It's not a race, and I know I'm learning, but I also know that I'm learning slowly. I'm not going to learn quick.
Yeah, it's a funny balance, isn't it? Because I'm sure somebody listening to this would say, yeah, Steve, I get it. I need to be more confident in myself, but I've never learned a foreign language before. I'd really like to do it, but I'm not sure I can. Like, I'm not sure how you would convince that. I mean, obviously, I've talked to hundreds of fantastic and amazing polyglots. So I've kind of been been hit with a tidal wave of kind of inspiration and proof that it can be done. But for the person listening, just thinking what there is, if that person has any kind of, is there any way for them to get involved if they're excited about it?
I think it's extremely difficult. And I see this in immigrants here in Canada who claim that they want to learn English. They go to the ESL school, but they're not really into it. They go home and watch Chinese television. And some of them try kind of at some level. And what has to happen is something has to come along, like boyfriend, girlfriend, or they're very interested in the TV program, or they're interested in, I don't know, something has got to catch you. And so then you're not doing it so much to learn the language as you're doing it because you're motivated by this thing. It could be a Turkish soap opera. It doesn't matter. Something has to come along that pulls you through. And then once you've learned a second language and you know you can do it, then it becomes easier and easier.
You've got the momentum going, but
for someone who has never experienced becoming comfortable in a second language, they don't think they can do it. They don't think they can do it. And that's a big obstacle.
That's a big obstacle if you overcome it. That's very laudable if you do overcome that.
Exactly.
It's a big challenge. Is that the biggest challenge in languages? Just the conquering the self? That sounds like the art of war almost. Or wait, is that the art of war?
I mean, it's the idea that, like, I'm here talking to you and you're speaking a second language. And yet you speak it better than most natives.
You're too kind.
No, but I mean, people can learn other languages. And you don't have to speak as well as you do. Like, there are people I've dealt with all my life, say in English, in business, people from Germany, from Sweden, even the Swedes, and we say, they all speak English so well. I mean, you have them. They make the same mistakes all the time.
Of course.
Like, I don't know if the Danes do that, but they never say there are.
Right.
They say it is.
Yeah.
It is many people in China. It is many people in China. Even totally fluent people say that. So there's always going to be some sign. By the way, I haven't noticed any of that in your English, so you must be totally bilingual. But it doesn't matter. I am sure that in the languages that I speak very well, there are Anglicisms in there. It doesn't matter. But people can get to a state where they're totally comfortable in explaining anything. They understand everything. It doesn't matter if they have an accent. It doesn't matter if they get the odd phrase that reflects, like the Germans, I have been living in Canada since many years. No, it's not since many years.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
I know people like that. That's a good impersonation for sure. Yeah. So where are we going to meet again? Is it going to be Montreal?
Yeah.
For the language festival, people can come and say hi to you there.
Absolutely.
Get an autograph and an autographed copy of Link, and that'd be great. But yeah, Steve, time has flown by as per usual, and
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I really like it. I think I didn't intend for this to happen before the episode, but it's really been a true catch up. We gone around a lot of the topics, and we looking back at the last few years, and I really enjoyed it. That was great.
Absolutely, same here. And I look forward to getting together over coffee or a glass of wine in Montreal.
Yeah, that's going to be great. So, just for the last thing, where can people find you, find more about you, or maybe if they want to get involved with Link, is there any special way they can start doing that?
Well, a link, of course, is LINGQ.com, which they can find on the internet. I'm Steve at Link, if they ever want to send me an email. I have my YouTube channel, Lingo Steve, and they're welcome to come and have a look and subscribe if they want. Yeah,
That's about it.
thelinguist.com is my blog. And I certainly would love to meet up with anyone that's going to be in Montreal.
Lovely city, highly recommend it. And I haven't been to the last two LangFests, but the first one I was at was a fantastic experience, and the organizational team did a really good job, especially considering it's the first time they did any such thing. And the weather should be fantastic at that time as well.
We hope.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Steve, and can't wait till the next catch up. But let's not wait 5 years this time.
Sure. Anytime.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. I really appreciate having you here today. Just before you leave, I just want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, which is italki. Italki is a tutoring platform where you can find affordable tutors for every language in the world, pretty much. So get started today and get a free $10 credit when you book your first lesson. If you go to actualfluency.com/italki, that's spelled ITALKI. So give it a go and feel how tutoring can really boost and enhance your language learning.